Just when I thought everything was going according to plan, Digitimes has to throw a wrench in all of the leaks and make me consider the possibilities, but thankfully Digitimes has a bumpy track record. I wish I could say that they were wrong all the time, but truth is they have gotten some things right. Ross Young is more reliable, but anyway, let's talk about how the next generation iMac might not have mini LED and why that could be a bigger problem than we think. Let's begin. Well, you know how your Apple sheep is a bit of a worrier, and as soon as I saw this news, I was immediately a bit concerned because, according to Digitimes' report, Apple has started production of the 27-inch iMac, but the one thing that they're disagreeing with a lot of people on is that it will not have mini LED. So that in itself may not be too big a deal breaker to some people. They'd be like, okay, darn, I kind of wanted XDR, but whatever, I just wanted a desktop iMac with more processing power, and a lot of people, of course, were like, yay, the iMac Pro is coming back. But actually, if Apple's not putting XDR on these displays, that means it may not align with the same pro-oriented workflow that they branded the MacBook Pros with. Therefore, does it justify having an M1 Pro or M1 Max and that kind of thing? Also, if it's not an XDR display and it's just a 27-inch monitor that's meant to cover the basic for iMacs, why not keep the white bezels at that point? If this is just meant to be a larger size option from the 24-inch iMac, maybe they do give it the M1 Pro or the M1 Max, but if they're reusing display panels from the current Intel 27-inch iMac line, that would imply no 120 hertz either. And the possible good scenarios we might derive from this is, okay, maybe we were getting ahead of ourselves with the leaks and perhaps there isn't an iMac Pro and they still intend on having just two screen sizes of iMac and it will look just the way the 24-inch iMac does, just bigger now and maybe with better specs. That might be the silver lining because it could probably retain the exact same price point of the current 27-inch iMac, so it still starts around $1,800 and you can have a decent amount of power. But that implies that if Ross Young is correct, that Apple is working on a mini LED 120 hertz 27-inch iMac, maybe both parties are actually correct. There's gonna be an iMac Pro and there's gonna be a regular iMac, but the bad news of that means if you want an iMac with mini LED and 120 hertz and perhaps the higher end CPU options, then you're gonna have to spend more money, because if there is this unforeseen iMac in the lineup that we didn't anticipate coming out, where there's going to be an iMac in between the iMac Pro and the 24-inch iMac, that means that Apple can comfortably charge much more for that higher end iMac Pro, and of course put all of the advanced hardware in the iMac Pro. But when it comes to the 27-inch iMac, you know, it would feel weird for them to just reuse the M1 chip again, especially given the current 27-inch iMac with Intel was supposedly much faster than the 21.5-inch iMac that we have now replaced. Could that mean we see an earlier announcement for the M2 chip, and this is how it makes its debut? Is it like, okay, it's faster than the M1, and it's in a regular LCD display that happens to be 27 inches, and then later in the year is when we get the iMac Pro, or Apple ends up scrapping the iMac with mini LED entirely because the display panels are just way too expensive, so they decide to divulge that into their crazy Pro Display XDR, which you can only get with the $1,000 stand or by selling your kidneys to afford such an insane monitor. Now granted, this might end up being one of those times Digitimes is wrong. They've gotten lots of things incorrect in the past, to be frank, and Ross Young has been really spot on with his predictions, and he's been very reliable with display panels because he is a supply chain analyst and can see what Apple is buying from suppliers. But what just concerns me are these like last minute bad news things, right? Like, I totally believe there are people in the leak community that make stuff up and fake things for the sake of attention, and this might be one of those times. But most of the time when someone is faking something for attention or trying to get more clicks on their site, it's because they make up something that's too good to be true. This product is going to be way cheaper than we thought, or this product is going to have specs that are way better than we thought. That's normally what ends up being wrong. But when we're getting closer to production, which Digitimes said Apple is now mass producing this iMac, we should only have a couple of more months before Apple officially unveils it, and they're saying it's going to be worse than we think. That's what I'm more inclined to believe, because that's bad news which leakers typically don't make up. You know, if they have the chance to lie for the sake of attention, it's typically because they want things to be better than reality, and that gets people hyped. In this case, I have to take the leaks somewhat seriously, even though it's not confirmed and we don't know for sure if this is going to end up being correct, although it gets my gears turning in my head of like, what's possible? Can Ross Young and Digitimes be right? Because Ross Young is telling us about the specs of this iMac. He's not telling us what the price point point of it is, and all that Digitimes is reporting on, is that Apple has started production of a larger size iMac, but they're using older displays that don't have the newer specs. Does that mean there will be some kind of optional 27-inch iMac that will be sold alongside the 24-inch iMac with multiple color options? That's another part of the report, is that there's supposed to be various colors with this new 27-inch option, and I assume they're not referring to like space gray or black. So depending on your viewpoint or what you're in the market for, this could be looked at as good news, I suppose. I know some of you out there were saying, I don't want an iMac Pro, I just want a larger size iMac. I guess if that's what you were looking for, this might be what you want, under the assumption that they end up putting the M1 Pro and M1 Max in that larger size. But at this point, considering it's more colorful and it doesn't have the higher end display specifications, I wouldn't be shocked if Apple just ends up doing a 27-inch iMac that still has, you know, the M1 chip or the M2 chip, and it's not Pro hardware, in which case I think more of you would end up being disappointed. And I could see lots of you being disappointed if you were excited for this iMac Pro that was going to have all of these great display specifications, but you were hoping it would start around $2,000 or $2,500, and now, because this cheap, basic, ugly 27-inch iMac is going to be sitting in that price point, now Apple can charge $3,000 or $4,000 for the iMac Pro when that comes out. It's really confusing to imagine all the potential scenarios, and I'm trying to pull a Doctor Strange and imagine the best case, and I think best case scenario, Digitimes ends up being wrong, Ross Young was correct yet again, and you'll finally be able to buy an M1 Pro machine for fairly reasonable prices with a great display panel included. But that's of course why I preface all of this by saying it's potential, it's not guaranteed, but of course I'm very interested in hearing your guys' theories on what Apple should do with the iMac lineup. You think it makes sense to have a 32-inch iMac Pro and a 27-inch regular iMac, or is 27 inches okay for all-in-one desktops? All that good stuff. Feel free to let me know what you're thinking down below. This is your Apple Sheep here, and I'm worried. See you in the next one.